That's why I don't have people from business school as managers in my organization. It's a natural thing that someone who manages a domain also understands the domain. In my book, a leader seldom dictates. And not just pushing back, but also giving them feedback and asking the right questions to maybe help them realize areas where they didn't. It's the ability to be more efficient as a leader. You'd also gain more respect if you have the technical background, right, from your engineers. And you get to the details of why things are not working. And you might also be able to communicate it upwards to your own boss and to your peers, what's actually going on. And I think that's not only true for tech, right? Also, it's probably true for so many other things in the world.
Welcome to the Pantrium Podcast. Here, there's no fluff and no sales pitches, just real conversations. I'm your host, Kristensen, and at Pantrium, we bring together bold and curious founders and leaders to share their stories, their lessons they have learned, and the hard truth behind their success. We are all about challenging the status quo and explore fresh perspectives while focusing on what really matters: people. If you're craving deeper conversations, you're in the right space. So let's dive in. Kåre, thank you so much for being here on the Pantrium Podcast. I have been looking forward to this dialogue. We met a few weeks back and have been waiting with patience till we sit here today. So really appreciate it.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for having me. It's also been something I've been looking forward to.
Just leading into every conversation, I ask my guests to think about a fun fact that kind of introduces themselves as a person to the listeners. So without further ado, Kåre, please share what's your fun fact?
I think one thing that probably people don't expect is that I brew beer in my spare time. I have a small brewery at home where I've arranged everything that you need in order to brew beer. It was specially built for this particular purpose. And then the equipment that I have is semi-automated. Being a geek, I feel like there are a lot of things you can automate in beer brewing while still not taking out all of the fun of creating your own recipes and trying out new stuff. I found a good balance in being able to craft my own recipes. And also using AI to come up with new interesting recipes and labels for the beer bottles.
That is so cool. And how many successful beers have you brewed so far?
I got it like a couple of years ago. And at this point, I brewed like 17 batches or something. I only had one that failed. I was trying to brew a Christmas beer. As part of that, I wanted to have some warm spices in there. All of the dry spices went fine, but I did not peel the ginger. So I think that was a mistake because probably there were some bacteria in this. The brew actually went bad. And that was sad. But other than that, everything else has been quite successful.
Very interesting. And speaking of learnings, let's deep dive into your career and your journey. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those learnings, the challenges that you've overcome, and how you did that through your career?
Yeah, I have a master's degree in computer science, and I spent the first part of my career as an engineer. And today I'm CTO of a challenger bank, Lunar, which is what I've been aspiring to do for a while. So for me, this has been great. It's been a journey. But in the early years, I got the ability to work as a manager relatively quickly. I had a student job and moved into management immediately after graduating. The company was relatively small, building web pages and other such things back in 1995. In 1998, I joined as a leader of the tech group, but I was a coding manager, like a tech lead manager more than anything. I enjoyed that portion, and I figured out relatively quickly that being part of management was something I liked. I also liked being an engineer at the time and coding and delivering products that people actually use and making a difference in their lives was something that also was interesting to me. So I like the balance between that. In my career, I've been going back and forth between coding fully and managing half my time and then coding again and then finally getting into management.
And thinking about when you say you were an engineer, you had inspiration to be a manager and moved towards that. As you sit today as a leader, how do you see that your earlier hands-on engineering experience actually becomes a benefit to you, or does it?
I have 106 people in my organization right now, and the structure that we have is organized around domains, and we have managers managing those individual domains. The managers that I have are largely people who have a background as engineers. That's important because it's a little bit like being a builder, right? If you go in and build a house and you're an architect who is supposed to draw the house and make the blueprints, and you have no experience whatsoever with what materials actually work and how much you can put on the top floor versus the bottom floor without the whole thing collapsing, when you won't have realistic expectations. And once you start building the house, if you're to oversee the construction of the house of that architect, you simply won't be able to tell whether what the builders are coming and telling you is true or not, right? Why something takes 2 more weeks than was originally estimated might just be like, you just have to accept it because you can't dig into the details of understanding the why. And so for me, that's been super useful, the fact that I actually know a lot about building software. I've been working for many years in infrastructure, building highly scalable database solutions and horizontally scalable compute solutions, software networking, which underpins everything, and where you can have massive scalability problems if you don't know what you're doing, right? And so for me to know the major pain points in those areas opens up the ability for me to actually go in and do a sanity check of my own organization, see are there areas here that I would consider worrisome, or if we have an incident, actually start talking to the engineers about what happened and understanding what they're saying, and push, not just pushing back, but also giving them feedback and asking the right questions to maybe help them realize areas where they didn't consider the problem before. So for me, it's the ability to be more efficient as a leader. And you'd also gain more respect if you have the technical background, right, from your engineers. And you get to the details of why things are not working. And you might also be able to communicate it upwards to your own boss and to your peers, what's actually going on. And why is this not just something we can change? If you don't have that technical insight, you might just take that pressure from your peers and say, oh yeah, that's too bad, right? The engineers are not really good. Whereas you could defend your own organization much better if you know the inner ins and outs of what's going on. So for me, it's a natural thing that someone who manages a domain also understands the domain. And I think that's not only true for tech, right? Also, it's probably true for so many other things in the world.
And I'm curious, now you mentioned good questions. What does that mean to you?
So a good leader is able to coach and have a great dialogue with the people that they manage. In my book, a leader seldom dictates. I try not to dictate anything. Instead, I set the direction and set people on a course and try to motivate them to go in a certain direction. And you do that by creating a vision, start talking about that vision. And then once you get to when the rubber meets the road and the stuff has to be built, and you get pushback from your engineers who say, this can't be done, then asking open questions and getting to the details of what is it that they're actually saying when they're saying it can't be built is where the good questions come into the picture. Good questions can be, so you're saying it can't be built, can you elaborate a little bit on that? And then the engineer comes and says, yeah, but it's enormously hard for us to build this within the time frame. Okay, so what is it exactly that's enormously hard about it? Because on the surface, this seems like a relatively simple feature. What is it that can't be done in 4 weeks? And they're like, yeah, but the thing is, in order to do this feature, we have to do all these other things because we have all this technical depth that needs to be paid off. And then you can, again, open that up and ask about the technical depth. And you can maybe go down and understand why wasn't it accumulated? Why wasn't it paid off during the course of the weeks or the months and the years? Or you can challenge them a little bit on whether there are other ways to build this. And have they considered, if you have some domain knowledge about something, you might even be able to suggest, have you considered looking in this direction? Without dictating the solution, they might be, oh yeah, maybe that we should take a look there. And then you send them off on a different course and open up the dialogue. If you don't have the background of understanding engineering, you will only get so far, right? That's why I don't have people from business school as managers in my organization. These guys are engineers as well.
What would you say as a leader is some of your biggest challenges that you have overcome, and how did you overcome those?
That's a good question. I think some of the more interesting ones happened while I was at Uber. I was at Uber for 6 years, joined when the company was some 400 people strong and left when there were 27,000. For me, that was a massive learning journey because it was in the hockey stick growth years of Uber, where Uber scaled from being a relatively small company to a global player. But I think that the challenge that was there, if you take a look at that one, that was the scalability challenge, right? The ability to constantly keep up with the pace of the business. Because of that hockey stick growth, the 400 people to 27,000 people sort of mirrored the amount of transactions going through the systems, which were also exponentially growing. We had the first year from 2014 to 15, I think we had a 600% growth in the number of transactions, which is insane and puts a lot of pressure on all of the systems. It's kind of equivalent to getting into a submarine, just starting to dive and going down, at some point, you will hear the hull starting to squeak a little bit. You hear some weird noises from machinery, and suddenly something breaks and water pours in. Now you have to weld it while you're still diving, and then something else breaks, and you're constantly fixing things. So it felt like we were constantly putting out fires, and at the same time, we had to get ourselves to a better place. We had to reinforce the infrastructure as well while we were diving. That would probably be the first one that I could think of as a massive challenge, and motivating teams, making sure that they were constantly building the right things. Instead of just being reactive, we got to a point where we were ahead of the curve and ahead of the business and could scale more than the business would throw at us. That was fun. I think the learnings from those experiences were how to balance operations, because you had to have 24/7, 365 operations when you are a global business, with the ability to also get yourself to a better place with a not too large crew. I was working in storage, and the thing about databases and storage is that if you don't delete stuff, which we didn't, unless we really had to for GDPR reasons and other things, but in by and large, all of the trips and all of the data that was made up of the trips that were taken were stored, right? So since day number one, we just basically accumulated trips. Then it just grows. Compute is completely different. If you have services running on a machine, you can scale them out horizontally, and they can take a certain load. If there's more load, you'll just spin up more machines and scale out more processes if you made it in such a way that you are horizontally scalable by making the whole thing stateless. For stateful things like databases, data accumulates. And if you are in an exponentially growing situation, an interesting thing emerges. If you have a steady volume, you have the same amount of transactions year over year. Now we just have linear growth in the amount of data that goes into the systems. But if you have exponential growth in the number of customers, you also have exponential growth in the amount of data that goes into the databases. And so if you look at the amount of data that you had last year, that would just be equivalent to maybe a month's work in the next year, right? And so it doesn't even make sense to delete last year's data because it's just so little compared to what you're now dealing with this year. And next year will be exponentially worse, right? That's an interesting function of running storage systems where you don't delete stuff, because all of that data has so much information in it that you can use for all kinds of other things. One of the things you can do, for instance, if you're Uber and you have enough traffic, you can find out where's the most traffic going on what times of day in a certain city, and you can work with city leadership to basically tell them, get them insights into how the traffic is flowing and do traffic planning with them, right? That's information that Uber, for instance, can share with cities. So you don't want to delete it because you have all this information, right? You also know from a business perspective, when is search price? When do you have search? You can start nudging drivers to get on the road because you expect search to happen in 2 hours because that's rush. And normally during Thursdays, you see 200% load on the number of customers coming in. So the data is really where the goal is, and you don't want to delete it. But from a storage perspective, that also puts some challenges on storage teams.
You said you went from trying to catch up to actually being ahead. For someone who sits in a similar hockey stick situation and are leading their tech organization, what would be your 3 advice or perhaps questions for them to answer in order to come from being behind to being ahead?
First of all, you should ask yourself, what does 10x load look like? And you should always try to build for 10x. Instead of just building for 200% or 100% load, you have to build for 10x the load that you have already. If you can anticipate what that looks like, then figure out where are the next fires going to be breaking out if I had 10x the volume I'm having right now. Then you know where your pain points are going to be, and you reinforce those first before they explode, right? And you have to figure out, of course, what is the sweet spot for that? Because if you also are cash constrained, you might not be able to just buy a huge database because that might be too expensive. So you have to figure out where are the bottlenecks in your system, and when you 10x the whole system, will they explode, and in what order? You anticipate that and fix them before you get to that point. So you keep your eyes on the 10x. Then the next thing that is key to operating at scale is automation. You have to take the human out of the equation. You can potentially manage small loads with people And we did that at Uber as well in the beginning when we had growth and our databases had to be scaled out. We created this horizontally scalable NoSQL database that took over from a PostgreSQL database, which was the first thing we built in the Denmark office. Initially, when we had to expand the capacity of that database, it was a manual operation where we would go into a war room. We would have all these computers lined up. We would be in terminals and have all these scripts that would be fired off in the right order. Be, are you ready? 1, 2, 3, fire. And it would be like, okay, now this is done. Now you fire that script. Now you fire that script. And that was simply because we hadn't had the time to automate the operational aspect of the database. Could it be automated? Yes. And we did do that. We actually built it out. And now that's a major thing at Uber, being built out in the Denmark office, which focuses on those aspects. But it's fully automated, right? It's a self-healing infrastructure now that where if the machine goes down, the system just automatically heals itself by spinning up a new machine and copying the data over and linking it back in. And it's highly redundant also, so multiple machines can go down without data being lost and other such things. But it wasn't in the early days, right? It was very manual. So automate, because that will allow you to scale your systems without throwing humans at the problem. You'll also find that at some point in time, you won't be able to just throw humans at the problem. It will simply not be feasible because the amount of transactions coming in, the amount of machines that go down would be unmanageable from a human perspective. The third one is also an automation aspect, which is the pets versus cattle kind of situation. When you start out as a small startup, you typically set up a few machines that are hosting your software, and you probably even name them. And in my first company, Albatross, in the beginning, where I was made the tech lead manager that I mentioned before, I had 8 people in my organization, and I was part of the leadership group. We built all these websites, and we also operated them on behalf of our customers. And we had an IT man who was like operating those machines. It was Windows machines. And he gave them names. I think we had maybe 5 or 6 or something. It was a small company, 50 people. And so he had this very dark sense of humor. So because the machines had a tendency to go down all the time, he looked towards history and found vehicles that had crashed. We had the Hindenburg, that big Zeppelin that crashed in the 1930s in Germany, I think. And then we had Titanic as well. And even some defunct spaceships from NASA. So it was relatively dark. But the thing about that was he nursed them and he took care of them. He upgraded them. He did all kinds of things to keep those machines alive. And sometimes when Titanic was down, right, that was a problem with that and that customer. When you name your machines like that, you keep them as pets. And while that's fine in the beginning, it just doesn't scale. So at some point, you'll have to treat them as cattle where they just have a number. And if they don't perform well, you'll have to say goodbye to them and you just spin up another one. And ideally, that is also something you automate that happens automatically. You don't worry about it. You just basically, it's just another machine that operates something, right? I know that the analogy here is a little dark, but that is actually the way it's being told out there in the industry, pets versus cattle is the thing. So I think that's the third one.
And you talked about automation just now and also earlier. Can you tell me a little bit about some of your use cases or case studies that you're working on today, where automation is really helping that? Also, you talked about scalability. Can you talk a little bit more about how is that coming to fruition in today's world and part of the recipes of success, as you will?
Yeah, so today I hold the position of Chief Technology Officer at Lunar. We are a challenger bank entirely online. We have an aspiration to become the best everyday bank in the Nordics, and then we'll see what happens when we go beyond that. But every time we go into a new market, it comes with new languages, but it also comes with new customers that need to speak that language. So there's a huge need for customer support as you go into those areas. Right? The way that works is that you can chat with our customer support function through the mobile applications. You can go into help and you can chat, or you can call us on a phone number and then you will talk to an agent. When I joined a year ago, customer support was quite large, actually. It was the largest organization in Lunar, and simply because that's the only way you can talk to us, right? So that's how you would basically interact if you have some kind of problem. But with the advent of AI, has come the ability to use machines in an area that hasn't previously been addressed as automatable that much, right? To some extent, of course, you can have all kinds of internal customer systems. We've had that using Salesforce. where you can have case management, you create a customer case, you can see what's been talked about, you can send it to another case worker if it's not your understanding, etc. But you'd have to train the individuals to understand all these things, from the mundane to the more advanced stuff. With AI, we've trained an AI on customer support questions and enabled that in the app itself. When you chat with Lunar support, you're actually chatting to an AI. If that AI is not able to help you, it will redirect you to a human agent. Or if you ask for it, you'll get to a human agent. And that in alone, the chat version has taken 62% of all of the chat messages that we have received. So from that perspective, that's an automation, right? That actually feels like something that really has made a dent in the number of people we've had to hire within customer support as we've gone into Sweden. We were expecting to hire 20. We only hired 5 because the AI took the rest. And now there's also the phone where you can call, right, which is a thing we are looking to do, which is also going to take another step at how many people we need. But in order to automate Lunar, if you zoom out a little bit, if you think about what a challenger bank really needs, it has a focus on the customers. And for us, those are consumers, businesses, and business customers that are using our API. We have a banking API that you can connect to as well. So those are the 3 segments that we are addressing from the outside. Internally, we have people in marketing, sales, treasury, and finance. And all of these functions also have an aspect of automation. If you don't do anything, everything will be operated by way of Excel sheets or Google Sheets or whatever you have and printed out paper, and it won't scale eventually, right? Because you'll have to hire so many people, not just in customer support, but also in finance and in other places, simply because the mundane work has not been automated. So I'm actually, as part of my looking at the organization and reshaping the organization towards the scalability goal, we've created a business area focusing entirely on automation. It focuses on automating all things Lunar operations. And the customers there are my other colleagues that operate the bank, right? So we're trying to help them get rid of all of the, manual entering something, manually looking at one sheet and comparing that to another sheet and extracting stuff. And again, here, there are also areas where it doesn't make sense to send a human, like transaction monitoring, for instance. Transactions throw in to the systems at multiple transactions per second, like thousands of transactions per second go into the underlying ledger database. If you're trying to figure out if someone is doing something they shouldn't, you can't send a human to do that because it's not possible for a human to grok that many transactions a second, right? But a machine can, and AI and machine learning models can actually take a look at these transactions, find patterns, and then they can hoist a red flag and see, okay, this looks like what we've seen before. Let's find out if this is actually a person on a list that they shouldn't be on, and then we might actually block their account and maybe report them to the police. But you will never be able to do that with just a human looking at transactions. So there are multiple cases across the board where automation makes a lot of sense. And
when you look at this great adventure you're on and have been on in terms of automation and your chatbot and now also on the internal automation teams, what has been some of the biggest surprises through that journey? Well, that's a good question. I think most of us have actually probably been taking a little bit back about how fast AI has changed various areas. And I think customer support, not everyone is doing AI customer support these days. And if they aren't, they probably should, right? The pace at which AI has rolled out has surprised me, but also the impact it has had. I would compare this technology to when we launched the smartphones or the advent of the internet. The internet itself is a huge global communication network underpinning everything we do. Without it, we wouldn't be able to do anything else or what we're talking about here. But these new technologies that sit on top of it, the smartphone, where you suddenly have your internet with you wherever you are, and you can communicate with everyone instantly, easily. And now you can make a machine help you navigate your life everywhere you are and give you not just insights, but also actually help you get stuff done without you doing anything. That's transformative to a new level. I would also say that when you look at the bank itself, it's interesting to see how many areas you can actually throw automation at. I've been working in many different domains during my 26 years in the industry. I've been working a lot in healthcare. I had my own company for 10 years where I helped digitize the Danish public sector at large. I worked in everything from the police to taxes to healthcare. There's a lot of different business processes there as well. And everywhere I've gone, there's been a massive opportunity for
digitization of business processes, which is like the automation to some extent, but also semi-automation. I think I haven't really been that much attached to digitizing marketing, sales, and other things like that. But I realize now, after we've started looking at it, what huge potential is also over there in those areas, clearly and obviously, right? So I think that's also not necessarily a surprise, but still kind of realization that, yeah, it's just all over, right? It's a thing that you should do and focus on. It is the only way to make your business more efficient.
Perhaps for someone who sits and evaluate, I might not be doing as much as I could with either automation in our sales and marketing or elsewhere in the organization or in the support function or even internally. What would you say is the key advice?
There's some truth to what you look at is also what you care about. If you don't look at it, you don't care about it. Things we are exposed to are things that we suddenly realize are super important. So when I've been sort of looking at the structure of the engineering organization with my counterpart in product, we have a very tight relationship between product and tech at Lunar, because we have these cross-functional squads where product people work closely with tech people on building the various products in the area. So I think if you start talking about how to work smarter, then they will also automatically start thinking about their work. The challenge, of course, can be if they are so overwhelmed with the job that they don't have the capacity to actually think about it, then they will see it as a distraction that someone comes and says, hey, don't you think you could do that smarter? They might actually not be having the right mindset. So there's something there about how can you best help out? Most people are actually quite happy when someone comes in and says, what can I do for you? And then they start talking about how this is a nuisance and that's a nuisance and that's a nuisance. And then you just basically try, if you can help them sort that and in terms of what would make the biggest impact in their life, you start chipping away at automating the biggest pains for them, then automatically they get more capacity to think about the next thing that would be lovely to have. Suddenly it becomes a really tight working relationship, and you will see the synergies of having subject matter experts who know the business tightly coupled with an engineering team that can really help change their day-to-day lives, right? So I think it's about starting to talk about it, setting a vision across not just tech, but the entire organization. This is a direction we're headed. Setting coming to help you. Please be open-minded, and then have someone who has skin in the game to actually make it better. Right. And then use measurements like KPIs and business metrics to see that you are making a real dent and change up there.
That makes a lot of sense. I think that's a good approach to it as well, that curiosity and open-mindedness, and focus on helping people with their biggest hurdles. As we're switching gears a little bit, how do you think the market is going to look like 5 years from now?
I'm having a hard time even imagining what it will look like. I think we will see, and I don't know how much time that will take, but relatively quickly, we will see a lot of the mundane tasks gone. It doesn't mean that people will lose their jobs. Hopefully, there will be things that people won't be doing anymore because we've automated it away using things like AI, but also other automation techniques. It's something that we've been doing for years, right? Automation is not new. We've been using big data and building software for various automated tasks. But with AI, we're shifting gears and actually are now able to do much more. So I think you'll see things that have been hard to automate before becoming easier to automate with AI, and there'll be more areas where we are basically making a huge dent at that. As a result, some of the more stupid jobs will go away. Customer support, for instance, you don't need a customer support agent to tell you what different plans we have at Lunar, free plan and a couple of paid plans, and what are the differences between those. Because you can look it up on the website. Instead of calling a customer support agent, you might as well chat to a chatbot that can inform you about it and tell the differences, and maybe even knows about your financial situation and can say, hey, it's actually more beneficial for you to have this plan because you are already doing XYZ. And you shouldn't be paying for that. You just get this plan and get the discount, right? And maybe even do that proactively to the customer and say, hey, if you actually want this feature, it's cheaper for you to go to the other plan because you get a discount in these benefits. So that's why I think you see a focus on personalization. You see a focus on all of the sort of stupid jobs that are typing something or answering questions that you could have looked up yourself, going away first, right? And then hopefully, as we're shifting gears and become even more involved, then I'm pretty sure we'll see personal agents popping up relatively quickly inside various fields that will help you with your day-to-day life. We are building one at Lunar that will help you with your daily finances. It's already there, but we are taking steps toward rolling that out even more. I've strengthened the AI around that in Lunar. We have more people working on that right now, so we'll be able to really transform how people work with their finances. But I sure see the same thing for other aspects of life. And at some point in time, it will just be second nature, right? You probably also see things like that actually be intelligent. For instance, if I didn't understand your language, if you were talking Chinese to me, which I don't speak, I might get an instant translation. And then when I spoke Danish to you, might get it translated into Chinese immediately. We would be in the sci-fi situation that's been described like in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? But I mean, that's the kind of thing that's probably coming as well. And all these commodities where I think barriers will be broken down and mundane tasks will go away.
What would you love to change today within the sector?
Oh, I think that's a broad question. I think my personal aspiration is to make a positive difference in the world. And right now, the purview that I have are within finance and people's personal finances. So I'm really hoping that with what we do here at Lunar, we'll be able to transform the way people live and work on a day-to-day basis with their finances, right? And so that you will be able to become much more financially empowered with what you already have and grow your money in a way that you hadn't thought possible, because you get the help to understand what are the instruments available to you and how can you possibly, and I think that's an aspirational goal to the sector that I'm currently operating.
And here at Pantrium, we love to challenge people's views and have fresh perspectives. Who do you follow that challenge your perspectives and inspire you?
I've been inspired by multiple people in my career. I would like to call out Travis Kalanick actually as an inspirational character who's been transformative to my life for sure. When I joined Uber, because of the vision Travis had in mind of becoming, being able to move not just people from A to B, but changing the entire transport sector and doing things much more intelligently. I also joined later on Cloud Kitchens, which was also founded by Travis. And here his vision of creating ghost kitchens that would allow anyone with an aspiration to cook, but not necessarily the ability to drive a business, to actually run a business, because much of the business is being taken care of by cloud kitchens. And everyone benefits from that, right? Someone who can cook the best pizzas in the world, but might not be super good at setting up a restaurant, or might not have the finances, can still go and make money off of their skill set and make a day-to-day living, and even more than that. The way that I've seen that transformation happen and the innovative ideas that have come out of those businesses have been extremely inspirational to me in terms of what's possible and what you can achieve if you start doing the right things and don't take no for an answer and just get stuff done. So that's definitely a person that I'm following, being inspired by in terms of how to achieve a real difference in the world.
When we start looking at leaders that have made an impact on us, even early in our career or just through our careers today, who has made a big impression on you?
Yeah, so Travis, I definitely mentioned Travis, but I also had Lars Seier as a manager for 2 years. Lars is also a very inspirational person. He's a visionary, and he has some great ideas about how, for instance, crypto should move into a more regulated world and become more mainstream. And I mean, I think the way that Lars has approached that as an entrepreneur has been inspirational by collaborating closely with Aarhus University, kicking off an entire area within the university and funding that, and basically creating a lot of PhDs in crypto that have been pivotal to creating sort of a center of excellence in Denmark crypto, right? I mean, that's not a small feat, and it's something that is impactful, not just for the university, but actually for Denmark at large. I would also call out my current boss. The company we have here and what we've achieved and what Lunar was before I joined a year ago has been massively impressive. Kicking off a challenger bank in probably the most challenging market in Europe is no small feat either. We are going deep as opposed to some of our competitors who go broad, right, and have more shallow offering. We're actually working on creating this everyday banking experience that is amazing and will allow you to do everything you need within Lunar. And I think that's also super inspirational.
Fantastic. I think that is a really good point to finish our great conversation on. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the Pantrium Podcast. So thank you so much.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you for having me.
If this episode gave you something to think about, I'll be really grateful if you could share this with your LinkedIn network. And to make sure you don't miss out on any new episodes, simply follow Pantrium wherever you are listening or watching. And just a note, the opinions and views shared by our guests are entirely their own and don't necessarily represent the businesses they work for. We really hope you enjoyed this episode. Until next time, bye for now.